Hi everyone, so I love Miraculous Ladybug and I decided to do a Femme Chat Noir cosplay, and here I'm going to show you how I made Femme Chat Noir's leather boots. This was the first time I ever made boot covers, and thigh-high boot covers at that, so let's get started and I'll show you how I did it. First, find the shoes that you want to use as the soles of your boots and trace out your leg. This isn't going to be the pattern of your boot covers just yet, it's just a really good reference. So what you're going to do next is actually measure the circumference of different points of your leg, and that'll be your actual pattern for your boot covers. The main places to measure will be your calf, mid-calf, your ankle, your knee, and then wherever you want the top of the boot covers to end, like mid-thigh in this example. So use the measuring tape to measure all the way around your leg, fold it in half, and then place it flat on the paper and trace out how long the length is, and then eyeball the pattern. The pattern is actually going to look a lot bigger than your leg, but that's how it is. Cut out your pattern and tape it down. There's no need to make two patterns, you only need the one. You can use it for both the right leg and the left leg. I used one of Yaya Han's fabric. It was the only black faux leather fabric that I could find that matched the cosplay that I already bought. I turned it inside out with the wrong fabric out, and you're gonna keep it folded so that when you put the pattern on top, you'll be cutting out two pieces. Put your pattern down and pin it. Once you're done pinning it, you're going to trace all around the pattern right at the edge of the paper, and maybe like about an inch away from the pattern, you're going to sketch out another line, and that's where you're going to cut. When you're done tracing it, you're going to take off the pins off of the paper pattern, and you're going to pin the two pieces of fabric together, that way it doesn't slide or anything. And then of course do the exact same thing with the other leg. So to be on the safe side, I took a needle and a thread and I hand sewed along the inner trace line, and then I cut it out and I tried it on just to make sure that it actually did fit my leg, because if it didn't, that would suck. So I tried it on inside out so I can still see where the seams were where I sewed, and I put on the shoes so I can see that the boot cover will actually fit over my shoes nicely. And lo and behold, it wasn't perfect, so of course I made it fitted along the top of my leg. I just pulled it where the seam was and I pinned it, and I made it just a little bit tighter, otherwise it's going to be baggy if I made it that way. So now I can actually use the sewing machine and sew all along the lines that I originally sewed before, including my new trace lines, so that my boot cover will be fitted. So I actually tried on the shoes and walked around in them for a day, and they were so painful and I cannot walk around the con with them. So I got new boots from the thrift store, and I actually really like the soles on these. They have a little bit of a heel, that way it's a little bit more femme chat noir. So I'm going to use these instead. And the beautiful thing about these boots is that it actually still fits underneath the pattern that I made for the other shoes. So what I'm actually going to do with these boots is I'm actually going to cut and tear this thing apart. I put the zipper down all the way and cut as low down the ankle as possible, and I cut off all of the other embellishments like the random belts that were on it. The glue gun is your friend. So what you're going to do with the zipper is, because you can't just take that off or else the boot's just going to be loose on you, I'm going to glue the top of the zipper so that the zipper doesn't like zip up and off. That way it'll be like a stopper on it technically. And then the lining of the boot was actually kind of falling apart as well since I cut it and it's not supposed to be cut. So I took a glue gun and I sewed the inner lining to the outside. And this is what it's going to look like when it's all glued up. Trying on the boot cover again, I'll put on the boot cover and the shoes, make sure everything fits the way it's supposed to. There's quite a bit of excess fabric at the bottom, but that's okay. We kind of need that to be able to fold it under and glue it to the sole of the boot. That way it makes it look like it was actually made that way. Don't forget to do the other leg. And once it's all sewn to the shape that you want it to, it's nice and fitted and everything, you can cut off the extra inch of fabric that's sitting on the side there. If you don't, it's actually might get ruffled on the inside and you can totally see the seam. And now comes the difficult part. What we're going to do is put on the boot cover, put on the boot, and you're going to put the fabric over the edges of the sole, and you're going to pin the fabric to the sole, to the rubber part of the shoe, the bottom. Please, 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 please be careful when pinning. Do not pin your foot. That'll hurt. I already pinned myself a few times. And when you're taking it off, also try not to pull out the fabric and the pins as well. Just don't hurt yourself. Now what we're going to do here is cut off any excess fabric and fold under the fabric and then pin it as it is so that it's following the edge of the bottom of the sole of the shoe. So now to glue the fabric to the shoe, what I used was shoe goo. My dad had this in the garage for I don't know how long and it didn't really work, so I'll show you later what I actually did use and what it did work, but it's going to be about the same thing. Just smother it in between the fabric and the shoe and pin it back down and let it sit for 24 hours. So what worked was actually E6000 is the name of the glue. I found this at, well, you can find it at any other arts and crafts store in the glue aisle. This stuff actually worked very, very well, and after 3 failed attempts with the shoe glue, this was great. So pretty much just do the same thing with the shoe glue. This stuff is really strong and sticky, and honestly I should have been wearing gloves, and I should have also been wearing a mask, but I didn't, and I advise you that you should. It does stink a little bit. So now to start with the top of the boot where it actually flares out, you're going to measure the very top of where you want the boot to end and about 5 inches below that. Measure out the circumference of your leg in both those spots and then trace out your pattern. The bottom of the pattern is going to be what I did was my mid-thigh, which was about 18 inches, and I'm going to mark off that. And then 5 inches up is where the top of the pattern is going to be. Now for the top of the pattern, since I want it to flare out, I made it 2 inches longer than my actual circumference of the very top of the boot where I want it to end. And then just connect the dots. And then for this part you can kind of eyeball it. I just kind of drew a flap onto the side. That way it will fold over and I'll show you how it looks like later. So then just cut out your pattern. And this is what it'll look like when you fold it over. It's kind of like an embellishment thing. You don't actually have to do it. It's just part of the design for Femme Chat Noir. I made it a little bit smaller just so it would be centered. You can make it any shape that you want it. And it's always good to try it on just to make sure you made the pattern right. You can put a little piece of tape here just so it holds. You can put it on your leg and make sure that it flares out the way that you want it to, or that it fits where it's supposed to and it goes as high as you want it to. With the fabric folded over, place the paper fabric on top and trace it out and cut it out. You need the 2 pieces so that you can sew them together and it'll look nice. Ignore the fact that I cut off the accessory flap. All you have to do is flip the pattern backwards so that you'll have one for the right leg and one for the left leg. So I was actually running out of fabric because I didn't really think this part through. So if you wanted to, you can place it on the fold. That's totally fine. So what you're going to do for the next leg is just flip over the paper and trace out your pattern. The only reason I did it this way, like with cutting off the flap accessory, is because I didn't want the back of the scrap paper that I used for the pattern to confuse you all. So here's how the shoe looks when it's all glued up. And the video on how to make the thigh flare actually got deleted, so I'll just have to tell you how I did it. So After you cut out your pattern, you're going to sew along the line, leaving about 3 inches unsewn so you can turn the whole thing inside out. And then you're going to sew it again about 5/8 away from the edge, all the way around. And this line here, I just sewed for fun. It's just to make it look nice. So here's what both of them look like. I actually tried gluing them down, the little flaps, but it didn't really work, so I ended up just sewing along the corner. And this is what it'll look like when you sew it to the top of the boot. Left leg and right leg. So what you're going to do next is sew along the edge that you had sewn before onto the boot. Make sure that you try on the boot and then put on the thigh flare on top of it, and you can pin it down there so that you know where exactly to sew it onto. There's going to be a whole lot of extra fabric from the boot underneath the thigh flare, and that's alright, you can cut it off if you want to. No one's going to see it. Now for the silver toe covers, I tried using a whole bunch of aluminum cans to make the toe cover. It didn't really work. It's not really flexible. I propose not to do this. Don't waste your time. So what I used instead was craft foam. You can get this from any arts and crafts store, and it's only like $1 for each sheet, maybe even less. Sketch out a rectangle that's just as wide as the entire front of your boot, and also as long as to cover the entire toe front of your boot. Cut it out and make sure it can fit around the toe. If there's a little bit extra hanging off the edge, that's totally fine. You're actually going to need that to hold on to. Trace out and make a second one. My advice to you would be to heat it first and then form it and then trace it out and cut off the excess, but I did it backwards and it works too, but it would have been easier if I left all the excess on there so I had something to hold on to. Use a heating gun to heat up the foam. It'll kind of melt it and make it flimsy, and what it'll do is actually hold the foam in the form that you shape it. So if it's on the shoe already, of which it needs to be, so you make it the right shape, just keep on pressing it and molding it, and when it cools, the foam will stay in the shape of the toe cover. And then trace along the edge of the sole and get rid of any of the extra foam that's hanging off. This is the time when I should have cut off the rest of it, but oh well. Use the same E6000 glue that we used from before and glue the entire inside of the foam and the toe front of the shoe. Once the foam is dry, you're going to tuck in the rest of the boot into the shoe so that it's safe, and you're going to cover it with tape and scrap paper or newspaper or whatever. That way it protects the boot. Take some silver spray paint and spray it all over the foam. I missed a few spots here where it actually went onto the sole, but nothing a little bit of black paint can fix. And that's pretty much it. Just take off all the rest of the tape and the paper and you're good. So here's the whole boot. It's a little bit difficult to get on, but you can do it. It slides a little bit. I just use safety pins to keep it up. A close-up of the thigh flares. My cosplay came with like ankle bracelet things that Shat has. I use them to cover up where you can actually tell like the shoe actually ends. And that's pretty much it. I hope this was helpful for all of you. I hope you like my cosplay. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye!